Hi everyone, Meteorologist Joel Curtis with your marine weather. Starting out with the sea ice edge, there's quite a lead has opened up from Nunivak Island southward, and the ice edge is generally retreating with all that warm advection, warm air moving up from the south, and pretty good wind to break up some of the ice. As you can see, really quite a lot of leads in Bristol Bay and moving up to the Bethel and Togiak area. So let's look at tonight's weather. First of all, we've got a series of lows. 991 millibar down by Dutch Harbor, followed on its heels right away with another surface low. 998 millibars up by the Gulf of Anadyr with plenty of wind and precipitation moving up the west coast. Same thing going on tomorrow, except those lows now have consolidated. 987 in the southeastern Bering Sea, south of Nunivak Island. Also 990 millibars up toward the Chukchi Sea. And you can see those warm fronts, but there's a little cooler air moving in behind it. In the meantime, let's take a look at the Gulf. Got a 1030 millibar high still just south of the Gulf of Alaska, and a 1040 millibar high up over northwestern Canada. Those two, it starts to weaken just a little bit up in northwestern Canada. The high is still in place south of the Gulf. Not a whole lot going on in the eastern half, but then let's look. Here's our low now. It's moved up into the Chukchi Sea, about 994 millibars. And we've got a whole new system south of Amchitka, about 976 millibars. Look at the triple point right where that occluded front meets the warm front. That's one we want to keep our eye on because that's going to end up in the Bering Sea this weekend. So we're going to keep an eye on it and just see how the models want to pan out with that thing before we can make some really good detailed forecasts on the wind and sea over there. So let's take a look at the Thursday's forecast for Southeast Alaska. On the inside waters, generally northerlies, 15 knots, seas 3 feet, except down by Ketchikan, 10 knots, 2 feet. On the outside waters, pretty darn light winds, 5 to 10 knots. Still a southwest swell, up to about 7 feet or so. For Friday, more offshore flow, northerlies on the inside, 15 seas 3 feet, and 10 knots down by Ketchikan, seas 2 feet, and then 10 to 15 knots on the outside, generally a northerly component, a little bit of westerly component up by Yakutat or so, but not a whole lot going on. Looks like the maximum sea about 6 feet. For the south central waters, first of all, starting variable in the eastern sections, 10 knots, seas 5 feet from residual swell, maybe 6 feet over by Cordova or so. And then as we get over further west, start seeing a little air filtering into lower Cook Inlet, about 25 knots in Kennedy Entrance, seas 6 feet, 20 knots off of Homer, seas 5 feet, but as you get further north, pretty light wind. And then for Friday, again, pretty variable in the eastern sections, but start ramping up southeasterlies off the Kenai Peninsula, down by Kennedy Entrance, 25 knots, seas 8 feet. Otherwise, 20 knots, seas 5 feet is a residual swell, and 10 to 15 knots in Cook Inlet. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, first on the Pacific side, down by False Pass and all the way up to Sand Point, southerlies with 30 knots and seas up to 15 feet. There's plenty of swell there along with the wind wave. Through Chillicothe Strait, 20 knots, seas 4 feet, and off of Kodiak Island, pretty much the same with 6 feet. And then on the Bering Sea side, southeasterlies, 30 knots, and seas up to 4 feet. Not a whole lot of fetch out there. Then for Friday, what we've got is generally southerlies on the Pacific side, ranging from 15 to 25 knots, seas up to about 9 feet or so, 6 feet in Chillicothe Strait. And then on the Bering Sea side, 10 knots up by Port Hayden, otherwise 15 to 20 knots down by the peninsula, and seas up to 5 feet with not a whole lot of fetch. Okay, for now, for our Aleutian chain forecast. First, close to Unalaska on either side, the Bering side or the Pacific side, up to 30 knots southwesterlies, seas up to 16 feet on the Pacific side, big swell there and some wind waves, but only 6 feet on the Bering Sea side. Then in the middle, we're ranging about 10 to 15 knots or so on both sides. On the Pacific side, that swell is still there up to 12 feet or so. And then on the Bering Sea side, around anywhere ranging from 9 to down to 6 feet. And then for Friday's forecast, now you start to see an easterly component on the eastern end. We've got 25 to 30 knots. Seas are ramping up on both sides with 13 feet south of Nikolsky, 11 feet north of Nikolsky. And then we're starting to see some gale force in the central Aleutians. And that's in response to those low pressure systems that are developing. Up to 35 knots on the Bering Sea side, 40 knots south of Kiska on the Pacific side. Seas up to 15 feet there with still a southwest swell or so in there, and 25 to 30 knots in the far western Aleutians. Now for the west coast, all southeasterlies as we've been having for days. Wind ranging from 15 knots up by St. Matthew Island, but take a look at that gale force off of the Kuskokwim Delta. And then up to 30 knots as you get further north, Cape Romanzoff on up to Nome, all over ice, but plenty of wind speed up in there. And then for Friday, the winds start to back off and start to get a little bit of a westerly component. So southerly winds down south, off of Togiak only 10 feet. For the Pribilofs, 20 feet, easterlies, seas 5 feet. But then those southwesterlies 15, ranging up to 30 knots the further north you get, along with that weather system went north. And then for Thursday for the northern waters, let's put an easterly component on all the winds, but generally southeasterly, ranging from 10 knots over near Kaktovik, 20 knots near Udiagovik. And then as you get into the Chukchi Seat and Bering Strait, 25 to 30 knots. And then for Friday's marine forecast, we have, again, along the north slope, Beaufort side, winds only 10 knots, but ramping up to 20 knots as you get on the Chukchi Sea side, and then 25 to 30 knots all across the Bering Strait on up to Cape Lisburn or so. So that's it for your marine forecast. Everybody remember to file a float pan if you're going out, and please stay safe out there.